Welcome to the Mighty Dragon. My guest today is script consultant Nick Fore. I've sent scripts to Nick before and had first-class feedback. Nick will give you constructive, helpful notes and suggestions which improve your craft. We discuss how Nick got into script consultancy and his work at the British Film Institute. He also gives some insights into common errors writers make and his approach to offer suggestions for improvement. I can personally say I've become a better writer because of Nick's feedback, and I'm so happy to have him as a guest to grill him even further. Welcome to the Mighty Dragon, Nick Fore. Hello.
Hello, Victoria. Thank you very much for having me on.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm going to ask you all about your career and how you approach your feedback, your script consultancy feedback, and all of that. So let's make a start. How did you shape your career to become a script consultant?
Yeah, I think it's kind of quite an unconventional approach that I've taken. I've worked in the film industry now for 6 or 7 years, and the first couple of those was just as a production assistant on set. So I was like a runner on various different productions around London, some commercials, and I did some BBC drama stuff as well. And then I moved into working in a kit room that is, obviously hiring out equipment, cameras and lenses and stuff to production companies. And part of that was to develop my own technical knowledge about specific equipment. And I think at that time I was stuck between whether I wanted to go down the route of the camera department or something a little bit more technical, or if I was interested in something else. And also part of the reason why I took that job was so that I could use the kit for free as well, because I just started to write a short film script, and I was like, one of the main expenses is, or it can be, the kit. And after going through all that process, writing, directing and shooting the short film and putting on the whole production, I kind of found that was what I enjoyed to do out of everything that I'd done in the film industry before that. So I got more and more involved in scripts, and like in the evenings after work at the kit room, I was reading screenplays and reading and consuming resources on the craft of screenwriting. And so I was kind of like learning in my evening hours. And then after 2 years, I left that job and just started reading scripts for various different screenwriting competitions and film festivals.
Yeah.
And I kind of cut my teeth doing that, really, because I was reading sometimes 3 or 4 features in a day to make it like financially viable. So
Right.
10, 12-hour shifts. So I read a lot of scripts to begin with. So I saw a lot of the patterns of what are the common mistakes and what the usual patterns are for writers, which really helped me in my ability to give notes.
Right. So you really came at it from quite a lot of different angles and shaped your career that way.
Yeah.
Completely makes sense.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of work from new writers. What's the same mistake you see time after time?
Yeah, I think it's there are a lot of things that are usually kind of stick out as work from inexperienced writers, but I think it all kind of comes under, well, not all of it, but a lot of it comes under the same bracket, which is that inexperienced writers are often really obsessed with ensuring that the audience knows exactly what's going on the whole time.
Yeah.
And actually, it can be really effective to change the way that you're thinking about writing so that you're stimulating questions in the audience's mind rather than constantly providing them with answers. Because when an audience asks a question, or they have even a suspicion about a certain character behavior or a certain plot point, it's actually a lot more compelling for them to watch, because they're invited into the process of the story folding in front of them rather than constantly knowing beforehand. And that goes for plot, character, and dialogue. Like, it happens a lot where you see inexperienced writers stating what's going to happen in plot before it happens. And you could easily just cut the end of that scene, leave it as a mystery as to what's going to happen next, so that the audience is actually surprised. The other thing is with characters, I think there can be so much focus on ensuring that the character is so consistent and that we know exactly what kind of a person that they are. And a lot of the time that leads to archetypes, and they're not presenting the question for us of who is this person by giving the kind of contradictions and the natural traits that we actually do have as human beings. And then for dialogue, it works. It's kind of like the whole conversation around subtext, which is inviting the audience to dig behind the actual line itself and find the hidden meaning, rather than just saying something really bland and direct, like that scares me or something to that effect.
Yeah. I think for writers, it's very difficult to get that balance between giving enough exposition, giving too much, and just being on the nose with the dialogue. I know I've suffered with that, as you know, Nick. Have you read my stuff?
Yeah, I've read a few of Victoria's scripts and stuff, over
Yeah.
the years. But you're so right, it really is a fine balance. And I think as well, like, because as writers, you have so much in your head and you understand exactly how the story goes and who that character is, it can be easy to write with that biased perspective and forget that the audience isn't necessarily as tuned in as you are. So sometimes what you think to be subtlety or nuance actually comes across as something that has a lack of clarity, and it can be completely misconstrued. But I also still think there is a sweet spot where you can allow some degree of interpretation, because that's of course when the directors and the actors' work really comes into the fold, in terms of how they perceive the role to be, or how they perceive the emotional value of the scene, which actually might be slightly different to what the writer initially intended.
Okay. What's your approach to script analysis and feedback?
So I think in terms of every note that I try to give, I have like a bit of a process in that I firstly establish what I think a problem is or what the problem is with a certain scene, let's say. And then I'll sometimes, if it's necessary, refer to a specific principle of screenwriting. Like I could say this scene drags on for too long and we could get out a lot closer to the turning point. And then I'll give, a reason for why the scene is too long, or what the problem is if we carry on too long after the turning point. And then what I usually do is like to as much as I can, I refer to another moment in the script where the writer themselves did it correctly. Or if you can't find any of those, I'll refer to a reference of theirs. So I think it can be really useful for writers to understand when they're doing something correctly, that they've actually done themselves. So then I could say to them, like, you did this perfectly when you exited the scene on page 20. So they can then flick back to their own script on page 20 and see how they did it, how they did it then. They can emulate it. Or if it's a slightly more complex note, I'll give a more specific suggestion for improvement, which aligns with their vision or what their intention is for the story. There is always an element of my own taste that I think gets impressed, in terms of the notes that you're giving, but I try as much as possible to capture what it is that the writer's trying to do, and then offer a suggestion for improvement that aligns with that. Yeah.
How do you approach giving constructive criticism? I think you've answered about highlighting the strengths already. So how do you do that? Because writers are very sensitive, I guess, a lot of us, and just to keep them motivated and keep them improving.
Yeah, I think a lot of it starts with talking about what's strong to begin with. And I think it's a very diplomatic role as a script consultant to offer notes in a way that is constructive and not alienate the writer straight away. Having said that, I've written coverage on over 1,000 scripts, and I think I'm probably less sensitive to the writer's sensitivities than I was when I first started. But I wouldn't say I'm by any means harsh. I also think that the kind of word choices that you use and the way that you frame the notes that you're giving is also really important. I like kind of steer away from saying weaknesses, for example, and I always just say points for improvement. That's like a habit that I've developed, because even just that change is like, it's perhaps being a little bit more conscious of the writer's sensitivities or ego, maybe. But I think as well, there was a piece of advice that I heard from someone who was doing a talk that I was at years ago, which was that in any kind of discussion or argument, If you completely disagree with whoever you're talking to, you immediately like shut them off to what argument you're going to give yourself. And the best thing that you can do is agree with them in some way, but then reframe what you're saying as something that delivers less contrast and less conflict. So to put that within the context of giving notes on a screenplay, I would say, I understand why you've written it this way, or I understand why you've written the character to say that line because of X, Y, Z. But I think it would be more effective if we did it this way, rather than just going, that's a bad way to do it, because that's immediately negative language that probably is going to alienate the writer a little bit more. So I think a lot of it comes down to rhetoric, to be honest.
Right. Is there any particular genre or types of scripts that you specialize in or prefer to work with?
I'm definitely biased towards British film and TV to begin with.
Yeah.
Like British and Irish cinema is what got me into film as a hobby in the first place. So within a broader context, there's that. And in terms of genre, anything that I get that's satirical or black comedy, I'm really into. Yeah, I think that's definitely where I find strength. I also didn't go to film school myself. I studied politics. And after about a year and a half, I think I originally wanted to get into political journalism. And after about a year and a half studying, I was like, I'm definitely not going to do that. I've learned a lot more into enjoying satire and political philosophy and stuff that kind of delves more into social commentary. So it is in some ways politically motivated, because that also, I have a base knowledge of that in terms of my studies. So even though I didn't end up in politics, there's definitely some application I have for my degree.
You escaped that one, didn't you? Dodged a bullet.
Dodged a bullet, for sure.
Your website mentions your work with the British Film Institute. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So with the British Film Institute, I basically read feature films for them. And I also give development notes as well. And that's for the BFI Film Fund, which is an open source fund for anyone that has UK citizenship. I believe there might be a couple more terms and conditions for the entry itself. But essentially, it's a case of assessing a script based on the funding criteria that the BFI have, which is agreed between them and the National Lottery. So I get all types of genres and all types of stories sent through from various different writers based around the UK. And that's the one thing, kind of assessing the scripts in terms of the funding guidelines. And then there's also the development notes that I give, which is when a project has already got development funding for the BFI and it's being taken forward. Then sometimes I offer notes, constructive notes, in the same way that I do just normally through my website. It's been really nice to read stuff through them that is geared towards the British independent film market, because, as I said before, that's my kind of like favorite aspect of the industry.
Yeah. Interesting. How do you stay current with industry trends and audience preferences?
Well, this kind of goes hand in hand with another bit of work that I do, which is like I write film reviews for an independent publication called the Roughcast magazine, which is an arts and culture magazine that's started very recently, but has already had a very successful run. So anyone watching, if they're interested in arts and culture, they should check out Roughcast magazine. So I review films for that, so I'm kind of keeping my eye on the cinematic landscape, and it generally as well for the work with the BFI. It's always useful to be aware of current issues and current trends in terms of what is happening in the cinematic landscape, and it's also just a part of my personal, like interests as well. I have kind of my main group of friends here in London are all in the film industry in various roles. There's got art department, actors, directors, writers, cinematographers. So there's always a constant conversation when I get together with those guys about, what's happening, what's going on, what we've all seen recently. And usually we go to watch films together and then all come out of it with a completely different opinion, because everyone's, thinking about different aspects. So there's usually a lot of conversation that's just stimulated in my social life as well. So it's kind of like all built in, I suppose.
Okay. What sets your approach to script consultancy apart from others in the industry?
Well, I think this is kind of like part of a wider consideration that I had even when I was teaching myself like how to read scripts and stuff. I think that so many of the resources that are out there and available to screenwriters is offering stuff that really kind of neatly packages screenwriting in a how-to guide. Like Save the Cat is the most
Yeah.
obvious reference to that. And a lot of it is geared towards the Hollywood paradigm, or at least the commercial sector in general. And a lot of it revolves around single protagonist, high concept stories that play out through three-act structure. And of course, that covers like a lot of films, not just in the commercial sector. That can also be for independent film as well. But I found not loads of focus in these kind of resources on low concept stories that are character driven, or stuff that is really
Yeah.
focused on thematics or societal issues and kind of social commentaries, or if we're talking about things that writers want to direct and shoot themselves, and thinking about how to write something that can be shot within single location with a super low budget. So all of those kind of latter aspects of it, I think, are a little bit more geared towards the realm of independent film, and isn't something that necessarily fits into kind of cookie cutter, um, the cookie cutter kind of what a film looks like for the commercial sector, really. So I would say that my coverage notes, I try and bring nuance as much as possible and step outside of these resources, and I definitely do use principles that I've gathered from those, because of course we all need to be aware of the basics and fundamentals, but it's also a case of thinking about how we can subvert these genre conventions, or how we can blend genres together, or how we can
Right.
kind of break these rules with intent so that there's authenticity. And I would say the other thing as well is that I always try and encourage writers as much as possible to refer to their own personal experience, their own personal emotional experience, or refer to their imagination to create plot points, because even without realizing it, so often writers just write based on what they've seen before. And it happens really naturally. And that's why you just see tropes over and over again. That's why they're there a lot of the time, because it just immediately, the way to solve a problem in a scene in some person's head is, because of what they've seen in
Yeah.
another BBC TV series or another film that they've watched. So I try and help and guide writers to bring a bit more of their own voice, sorry, than just the easy solution that pops up in your head first time.
Yeah. I heard on a podcast the other day that once something is out there and being broadcast, the commissioners are already thinking of something different. So while writers are responding to that, oh, there's loads of zombie stuff, say they're writing zombie scripts and stuff like that. They just don't need them because their genre's already out there or
Yeah,
already done. They're not
yeah,
looking at doing
definitely.
more.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance, and I think there's a lot to be said for kind of anticipating those trends as well, and thinking about
Yeah.
where the industry is likely to go next, or what is likely to be called for in the next 5 to 10 years. And for example, there's a lot of like, I've been sent a lot of pitches for like eco thriller films recently and stuff, which probably means like it's a bad time to write eco thrillers now
Yeah.
because they're already in development. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, just keeping an eye on this on the film industry landscape and trying to predict those patterns can be useful.
Yeah. So, as well as the script notes, do you offer services such as pitch preparation or industry connections?
Not necessarily pitch preparation as such. I definitely help in terms of the early stages of development with scripts, and I help writers to develop treatments or help them with their synopses and
Yeah.
give notes on that. But in terms of like helping a writer to prepare a verbal pitch, it's not really something that I do. And with industry connections, I also don't position myself to say to writers that I can bridge the gap between them and
Yeah.
producers. My expertise definitely lies in offering notes on their scripts and helping them with storytelling, and that's where I'm also most comfortable positioning myself. So
Right.
I'm very much firmly embedded within the technicalities of story and script, and then from there after that it's kind of the writer's own journey.
That's great. Nick, final question. Where can we find you? What's your website?
Yeah, so my website is www.nickfore.com. That's Fore. And I'm also on TikTok, which is at nickfore.scripts. And there's like hundreds of videos of like little kind of gems and little tips for screenwriting on there as well. So there's a whole backlog of stuff. And on my website, I've got a video essay series as well.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. You watched a couple before.
Yeah.
So it looks at the relationship between character and theme across different screenplays, and it's a bit more of like an intermediate to advanced look at a breakdown of a script rather than the kind of more basic screenwriting 101 type videos that you might find.
That's great. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your wisdom with us all. So we were all hoping to be better writers. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Nick, so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.